Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So we've looked quite a lot at what's going on with the world of Peridea. We've talked about all the possible directions this storyline could go in, witches, ancient civilizations, powerful and misunderstood nightmarish creatures. It's a lot to swallow and comprehend, and if I'm being honest, it's all basically speculation at this point. We really just don't know what's going on. We have no idea what is waiting for Baelen's skull off in the distance. And so, let's switch back to the Star Wars galaxy, where Thrawn is returning first to Dathomir to engage in some good old-fashioned witchcraft. We're not sure what kind of army he'll be raising from slumber or from death, but ultimately Thrawn's not like a warlock. He's just the blue man paying his dues to the three great mothers. At the end of the day, Thrawn makes the big bucks, gets all the admiration from Imperial groupies because of his command abilities, primarily his knack for winning large naval engagements, using brilliant strategies, and training his underlings to be perfect at the tactical level. Facing Thrawn's fleet is like facing Belichick and the Patriots when Tom Brady was in his prime. Simply put, no one has a good time watching their team go up against them. No one wants to see the Belichick Empire return. And this is why Ahsoka, Hera Syndulla, Sabine Wren, Carson Teva, and many other Rebel veterans are willing to do whatever it takes, even sacrifice their careers to make sure that Thrawn won't return to this galaxy. He's that big of a threat. Well, maybe not Sabine. I guess no matter what world you live in, artists always still need their critics. It's a shame they never let that dynamic play out. You know, Sabine Wren, the artist, versus Grand Admiral Thrawn, the art critic. The art critic has a lot of power and control. It's his opinion that shapes public opinion on how to view a work of art. But at the same time, an art critic is powerless because they don't actually create anything. They just criticize. The artist is the person who's vulnerable and powerful at the same time because they're the people putting their thoughts, their personality on canvas. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video. If you guys really enjoy our ships and vehicle breakdown videos, you've most likely heard of War Thunder. It's one of the most popular free-to-play, large-scale multiplayer war vehicle simulator games out there. War Thunder is famous for featuring a huge roster of vehicles that cover ground, air, and naval combat from the early 20th century to present-day times. Seriously, the sheer amount of vehicles they have here is impressive, and they're constantly updating this game with new features and vehicles. Just recently, they added on the Sons of Attila update, which features a huge assortment of new Hungarian war machines. There's a great deal of customization for every one of these vehicles, and I'm not just talking about skins, I'm also talking about additional weapons modules, active protection systems, and other things like that. Which is important because unlike other games with just health bars above your vehicle, each vehicle has different parts and modules that can be individually hit and destroyed, which affects the functionality of your platform. Adding great sound design and a wide variety of large and epic battlefields based on real-life locations, and we're talking about some of the best gameplay in the genre. Download War Thunder for free by using the link in the description below. All new players and those who haven't played War Thunder for half a year or more will receive some special bonuses, including rentals for the P-40E1 Warhawk and M4 Sherman tank for a week, along with free unique skins for them. Other bonuses include a special decorator called the Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, 3 premium vehicles, and a week access to a premium account. You better hurry up though, this offer ends soon. Thank you for your patience, on to the rest of the video. Anyway, let's keep focused. Thrawn will eventually link up with the Imperial Remnant and its Shadow Council, or what's left of them after the Battle of Jakku. And so I guess the real question, the real thing that the New Republic should be worried about here is just how many ships, how much resources can Thrawn rally once he returns? I mean, at the height of the Empire's reign, as in the Battle of Hoth in 3 ABY, the fleet had over 25,000 Imperial-class Star Destroyers and no less than 13 Super Star Destroyers. The Galactic Civil War would end just 2 years later at the Battle of Jakku. I mean, there's no way that they just completely zeroed out there. There's no way that they could have destroyed 25,000 ships in that short period of time. That would be equal to 34 Star Destroyers being destroyed every day for 730 days straight. That's 2 sector fleets gone up in smoke every single day. That's 1 Battle of Endor worth of Imperial ships every day for 2 years in a row. In those last 2 years of the war, the rebels would be lucky to take out 1 or 2 Imperial-class Star Destroyers in a week, let alone a day or an hour, which is what's required here. And so what are the real numbers that the Imperial Remnant control? What kind of crazy shenanigans and misdirection is Palpatine up to from the grave? Well, as some of you probably know, Emperor Palpatine had a protege, an individual known as Gallius Rax, who would become the counselor of the Empire shortly after Palpatine's death. While the rest of the galaxy assumed Grand Vizier Mas Amedda was in charge of the remaining Imperial forces in the galaxy, the truth was, he was just a puppet, being held captive in his own office by Rax's men. Gallius, or Galley, as he would have been known, was born as an orphan on the world of Jakku. Not all that different from Rey, actually. Gallius Rax had stowed away on Sheev Palpatine's ship, the Imperialist, when it arrived on the planet. This was in 30 BBY, years before the Clone Wars even started. Palpatine had been looking for ancient secrets hidden on Jakku. Palpatine would sense that Gallius Rax was on his ship. He would confront the child and give him two choices, either die or work for him. Gallius Rax obviously chose the latter, and he would become Palpatine's protege. And Palpatine would basically shape him into an insurance policy should he ever die. Now, most mentally balanced leaders, individuals who run countries, corporations, when they're getting to a certain age and they realize they're going to have to retire, they usually prepare that company or country for the transition process. They'll, mentor a new CEO, president, or some kind of political leader. And if they're smart enough, they might just retire early, enjoy their last few years, maybe stay on as a mentor. But not Palpatine. You see, Palpatine was so full of evil and spite. His mentality was, if he dies, then the Empire deserves to go down with him. Palpatine believed that if the Empire was not capable of protecting him, it should be punished. And so he would create the contingency plan. And at the head of that plan would be Gallius Rax, and his main goal would actually be to speed up the destruction of the Imperial Navy. The second part of the plan involved saving a small portion of the most effective and loyal officers that were hand-selected to start a new empire in the future. You also had Operation Cinder, which was kind of a part of the contingency plan, and it involved punishing former Imperial worlds for their failure, again, to protect Palpatine. It's all very vindictive, and more importantly, all of this chaos, all of this destruction was designed to lull the New Republic into a false sense of security and to make them think that they had truly defeated the Empire.
I see no enemy. The Imperial fleet is scattered and broken. They have no centralized command.
Palpatine wanted the New Republic to grow lazy and arrogant in their string of defeats. And I have to say, judging by how the New Republic looks in the Ahsoka series, just a few years after the war ended, his plan is working. The New Republic is becoming more and more useless. It's losing all of that vigilance that it had before. More importantly, all of this noise, these Imperial warlords causing havoc across the galaxy, attempting to wipe out entire planets, did exactly what they needed to do. It kept the rebels who actually cared busy. And so no one noticed that small group of individuals who kind of snuck off into the unknown region. As a matter of fact, individuals who knew about these Imperial officers going into the unknown region just assumed that they were committing suicide in an honorable way or something like that. So that is kind of the background information about the vibe in the galaxy, but what does the Shadow Council actually control now? Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know, the Shadow Council was basically the organization that ran the Imperial Remnant. Gallius Rax was at the top. He would die. He'd be replaced by Admiral Ray Sloan. Yeah, there are a lot of different individuals coming in and out, but it was just a loose collection of generals, admirals, moffs, who are coordinating, loosely sharing resources so that they can survive the New Republic onslaught. So we brought up this number of ships. The Imperial Navy had 25,000 Imperial-class Star Destroyers. This actually doesn't take into account the tens of thousands of Nebula-MB frigates, Imperial light cruisers, and perhaps hundreds of thousands of Gazanti-class cruisers and other ships of its class, along with the millions of TIE fighters that littered the galaxy, like Volkswagen Beetles in the 60s. Iconic in design with a very troubling fascist history. Now, we previously talked about how in 3 ABY, the Battle of Hoth, the Empire was at the height of its power, and then just 2 years later at the Battle of Jakku, they were basically decimated. Like, what happened? But the truth is, even in 4 ABY, a year before the Battle of Jakku, when the Battle of Endor occurs and Palpatine dies, the Empire is still massive. Like, they probably had almost 25,000 ships at that time still. I mean, if you really think about it, between Hoth and Endor, the rebels hadn't engaged in any large, meaningful battles. I'd be surprised if the Empire lost more than a handful of Imperial-class Star Destroyers during this 1-year period. The rebels were too busy running and licking their wounds after Hoth. I mean, if you actually take a look at stories like Twilight Company or Follow the Rebels series, destroying an Imperial-class Star Destroyer before the Battle of Endor was a very complicated process. When Cham Syndulla took down the Perilous with Vader and Palpatine on board, he had to expend like 2 decades worth of supplies he had been hoarding. I mean, it takes a lot. We are talking, after all, about a 1-mile-long fortress, bristling with weapons emplacements and shield generators here. Taking down one of these ships from a rebel's point of view was a strategic and almost operational level victory. And this was simply because the rebels, for most of the war, were just lacking resources, ship, and soldiers. But for the Empire, the loss of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer was just a minor setback, a tactical loss, if you will. And so the Battle of Endor, while devastating for the morale of the Empire, from a war material standpoint, wasn't that big of a deal. The Empire only had perhaps the equivalent of 2 sector fleets and the second Death Star. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is still a massive force. We're talking about at least 1 Super Star Destroyer, 30 Imperial-class Star Destroyers, along with dozens of supporting ships of the line. But if you look at the bigger picture, 30 Imperial-class Star Destroyers is like 0.12% of the entire Imperial-class Star Destroyer fleet. It's so minuscule. Which speaks to a greater truth about the Empire and its actual military strength and capabilities. Why didn't Palpatine just collect thousands of Imperial-class Star Destroyers and have them waiting on Endor to ambush the rebels? Well, that's because the Empire was massive. We talked about sector fleets before. The sector fleet usually has anywhere around 7 to 14 Imperial-class Star Destroyers, which sounds like a lot, but actually, the amount of territory they have to patrol is ridiculous. According to the Republic, a sector was a territory that had at least 50 inhabited systems, and the galaxy had around 1,000 sectors. And so every ship you take from a sector fleet will be sorely missed, and it'll leave dozens, or at least a handful of worlds undefended, and that's something the rebels would have caught up to very quickly. And when you're in the midst of a war against the Rebel Alliance, which had a small mobile fleet that primarily focused on hit-and-run attacks, every Star Destroyer that you pull out of your defense leaves multiple targets open. This is why the Emperor took the more pragmatic route of assembling just 30 ISDs for that final battle. I mean, the Rebel fleet was even smaller. They had less than a dozen MC-80 class Star Cruisers in comparison. They were easily outnumbered by the Empire 3-1 at that battle, if not more. The Empire had to hold just way too much land, and it really never tried consolidating when it had a chance, letting some of the peripheral systems go maybe, and protecting the core. That's something I think a more pragmatic leader would have done. I mean, even at the Battle of Jakku, the Empire still didn't have a large fleet. At most, they had hundreds of Imperial-class Star Destroyers, not thousands. And so you're probably starting to see where this video is heading towards. We continue to question where these 25,000 Star Destroyers go because it's honestly too hard for the Rebellion to destroy them all. It's too hard for the Empire to destroy them all. I mean, ships of these size are really hard to hide and destroy. If you take a look at the world of Ferrix and Endor, this takes place 15 years after the end of the Clone Wars, and they're still breaking apart Venator-class Star Destroyers, and the Republic Navy was only a fraction of the size of the Imperial Navy. And again, the Rebel Alliance Navy was never big enough to destroy the entire Imperial fleet. At their height, they had maybe 2,000 different capital ships, and you guys all know, like, in the Rebel Alliance, capital ship means a completely different thing. Now, the Rebels had several large fleets, enough to really challenge the Empire in multiple systems and keep them off balance. But this was more about presenting a real danger for the Empire's image, rather than creating a force that's actually able to occupy and hold territory. I mean, the real reason the Empire fell was because its logistical network collapsed, and more importantly, people started rising up everywhere once they saw that it was possible. Emperor Palpatine, like most authoritarians, overestimated their own ability to actually make people's lives better. Although I'm not really sure he cared about that from the beginning. But yeah, people were suffering everywhere. They just needed some kind of inspiration and hope, a little kick in the ass to make them realize that a rebellion was happening and they could benefit by joining. Mon Mothma understood this very well. She understood that they never needed 25,000 Mon Calamari cruisers to destroy the Imperial Navy. They just needed a small percentage of freighter captains to stop hauling munitions and fuel, a civilian here, a civilian there, to go to town hall and try to overthrow their local Imperial officials. Democracy just needs inspiration, and once you get the ball rolling, it becomes a tidal wave. And so the rebellion only really needed 5 to 10% of the firepower that the Empire had, just enough to keep itself alive and a threat to the Empire. And so the Imperial-class Star Destroyer wasn't just getting destroyed in combat. There were other ways to disable a ship of that size. For instance, during World War II, one of the mightiest weapons in the German army, the Tiger tank, couldn't really operate if the military wasn't functioning at 100%, which is why more than 40% of Tiger tanks were lost because of non-combat related issues. They were either abandoned by their crews, bogged down, some kind of mud. Mechanical failures were also a problem, as was running out of fuel and munitions. I'm sure some tankers also realized, oh shit, I'm a Nazi. And so the same thing happened to the Imperial fleet. Suddenly you didn't have enough munitions or fuel to power your ship. You didn't have spare parts to replace battlefield damage or enough new recruits to replace battlefield losses. You had entire Imperial-class Star Destroyers getting basically broken apart for spare parts. So this was a major problem for the Empire, especially after the death of Emperor Palpatine. The Chimera, by the way, is a great example of just how vulnerable a Star Destroyer can be when it's removed from its logistical support for a decade. I mean, Thrawn was nursing that ship on Peridea like a baby. And once Republic commanders realized that the mighty ISDs were no longer as dominant as they used to be, it was kind of like sharks smelling blood in the water. On top of this, Gallius Rax assumes the identity of like a fulcrum-like agent and starts literally feeding information to the New Republic about where Imperial forces are. Of course, he's not for the New Republic, but in this case, he wants to destroy as many Imperial ships as possible, and that definitely leads to an uptick of ISDs getting destroyed. But this still does not account for all of the losses. And this is where we get to the last stage of the contingency plan. You see, all of this chaos, these Imperial warlords fighting amongst each other, the loss of entire sector fleets was a charade. It was purposely designed not only to distract the New Republic from what the Empire was really doing, it was also designed to get rid of some of the dumbest and most chaotic Imperial officers that Palpatine and Gallius Rax simply did not like. While one group of Imperials were being led to the slaughter, the other portion of the fleet gathered quietly in areas like the Queluhan Nebula. Nebulas are basically large clouds of star material, and they do a really good job of hiding the signature of ships, so it's a nice, natural little place to lay low. In the Queluhan Nebula, Grand Moff Rand was in charge of a fleet of no less than 10 Imperial-class Star Destroyers. And there were several remnants all across the Outer Rim. In the canon, they call it Imperial Remnants, as in there's a plural of different groups. In Legends, they just call it the Imperial Remnant because they ultimately would consolidate beneath either Warlords or Thrawn. You also had Imperial Remnant groups led by Moff Gideon, an ISB officer. He had less resources than Rand and Brendel Hux, but he was still very effective. You also had even smaller operations like the Imperial Remnant on Morak, who were mostly ground-based and focused on refining fuel. You also had several fleets which were allowed to peacefully return back to the core of the galaxy. The core of the galaxy had a lot of loyal Imperial worlds because these worlds genuinely benefited from the expansion of the military-industrial complex. So you got dozens of Imperial-class Star Destroyers just chilling on worlds like that. The biggest group of Imperial survivors were the ones that Palpatine hand-selected. After the Battle of Jakku, many of these officers would make several micro-jumps until they reached a rendezvous point in the unknown region. There, the largest part of the Imperial Remnant would be waiting under the command of the Super Star Destroyer Eclipse. It was basically once Palpatine's own personal ship. If you take a look at First Order documents, you'll see that they have a lot of Imperial-class Star Destroyers. These are those ships that have survived until the First Order War. And basically the only thing that they really changed with these ships was they heavily automated the insides of them so that they can be run with a much smaller human crew. It should be noted that there's no indication that these ships partook in some kind of early offensive against the New Republic. I mean, we don't even know if Thrawn actually attacks the New Republic. I'm just assuming that happens. Everyone's assuming that's happening. The fact that there's no mentions of Thrawn or his attacks against the New Republic, even in the Aftermath and Bloodline novels that take place before and after the Ahsoka series, is worrying. It should be noted that Thrawn's people actually originally emerged out of the unknown region. Thrawn's entire reason for joining the Empire was to see how this galactic faction could help his own people in their struggle to stabilize the unknown region. So having said all this, my estimate, this is a very rough estimate, is that waiting in the unknown region, the Imperial Remnant forces, the main group, they probably have hundreds, if not in the low thousands, of capital ships. Now, in the Outer Rim, scattered in little different pockets, this is probably the group that's being controlled by Gilad Pellaeon, right? They might have a few dozen, if not a few hundred Imperial-class Star Destroyers. It's a much smaller fleet, and they have to kind of keep it that way Because remember, the New Republic Navy isn't really that large. They have at most, what, 2,000 ships? A few dozen or a few hundred ships might seem like a small percentage of the original Imperial fleet. But remember, this time the situation is completely flipped around. It's the New Republic and its many planetary defense forces that are spread thin and on the defensive. The Imperial Remnant don't really need to hold territory at this point. They can act just like the Rebellion, do hit and run attacks on New Republic worlds and just destabilize the local civilians' opinion about the New Republic. If you give Thrawn just one sector fleet, he can do a lot of damage, but if you give him a few hundred Star Destroyers, well, that might just rewrite the entire sequel trilogy. That is, if Thrawn is still as mentally sharp as he once was. I think there are some truly troubling signs in Thrawn's behavior in the Ahsoka series and the last few seasons of the Rebels series. He seems to be a shadow of himself in these depictions and less capable with each battle he engages in, as the ego and emotions he kept in check for so long begin to surface. I guess that's what happens when you work with a Sith for too long. So there you have it, guys. Those are my estimates. I'm sorry I can't figure out more accurate estimates. We simply don't have enough information to go on. But let me know in the comment section below if you guys have your own estimates or more information that could give us a better understanding of what Thrawn will have to work with. Although, if it's the Thrawn that we know and love, you know, the strategic mastermind, even if he has 2 or 3 Star Destroyers, this should be a lot of fun. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'm not wearing pants.